In February 2022, Westminster Virtual Academy was very excited to host our special guest author, Kate Schatz, creator of the Rad Women series and many more awesome books. She came and talked to us, read from her stories, shared about her process, and we hope you enjoy this recording of Kate talking about her work and answering our questions.
I'm coming to you live from California. I live right outside of Oakland, California. There's no snow here, but it is really cold in my house. So I just threw on this old sweatshirt. Usually I try to dress, a little nicer for my Zooms, but I was freezing cold. So, but not how cold it is where you are. So I'm Kate, I'm an author, and yeah, I've been doing these Zoom visits to schools all over the country. In normal times, I do a lot of visits to schools in person, but right now I've been offering them to folks like yourself who are asynchronous, who are home, who are doing this on Zoom, because I miss talking to students and I miss sharing my work. So might as well do it this way. So I'm going to show you guys some of the books I've written. I don't have a ton of time today. I can go for about half an hour before I've got to go to my next meeting. And really my favorite thing is to answer questions. So if you have questions, please ask them. You can put them in the chat. I'm going to share my books a little bit. I'm happy to read a story, but if there are questions, that's kind of my favorite thing, is to be able to talk and answer them. And since we have a smaller group, that's a really great opportunity. I know sometimes it feels awkward or embarrassing to ask a question. So we'll see. Let me show you the books I've written. So Miss Seward held up Rad American Women A to Z. And so a couple things to know about this book series I've done. All of these books that I'm going to show you are nonfiction, right? So I'm actually trained as a fiction writer. That's what my background is in terms of creative writing. So I've been writing short stories and novels for a long time, but I have also always loved history. I love really fun, interesting, cool histories about people. When I was young, my favorite stories to read were books about scrappy young women who did really cool adventures. That was my favorite kind of thing to read. And so that's kind of what I tend to write about in these books. So my books focus on stories of really fascinating women and girls from history, some alive today, some from a long time ago, who've done really remarkable things. And I focus on stories of people whose stories don't often get told, marginalized communities, women of color, queer women, and stories that just maybe don't always make it into the history books, or women that we maybe haven't heard of. So the first book in the series that I did is, again, Rad American Women A to Z. It's an A to Z book. So it's a kid's book, but I really think of it, I call it a children's book for people of all ages, because I don't think that you need to be a kid to enjoy these stories. And I also don't think that stories for kids need to be dumbed down. I think that kids can handle a lot of complicated information that maybe adults often think that they can't handle. So this is structured as an ABC book. Where each letter of the alphabet tells a story about a different woman from history. So I got the idea when my daughter was 2, and I was thinking about what kind of books would I want her to read when she was a little older? How would I teach her the history of the women that came before her? So I thought about doing it this way. I was even more motivated to make this book when I had my son, actually. And so a lot of times people think because these books are about women and girls that they're only for women and girls. And I really like to make sure people know I write these books for people of all genders. And I think it's just as important for boys and men to learn these histories as it is for women and girls. So A is for Angela Davis. She's an activist and a philosopher and a public speaker and a writer. B is for Billie Jean King. As you can see, she's a tennis player. I like to explain Billie Jean King. There's all kinds of stuff to say about her, but the thing that she's kind of really famous for is she was a professional tennis player in the 1970s, legit amazing tennis player. And there was this guy tennis player who was a total bully. And he basically kept teasing her and saying that she wasn't that good. And he kept saying that women could never be as good as men in sports. That there's no way that a woman could ever beat a man at any sport. And she tried to ignore him. She's like, whatever, go away. But he kept at it. He would not stop bullying her. And he got really public with it. He'd go on the radio and basically talk about her. So she finally was like, okay, fine. Let's do this. So they played a tennis match against each other. and it was on TV, and like 100,000 people watched it live on TV. And guess who won? Yeah, she won. She beat him in front of everybody, and got even more famous. And he was not happy. He was a little embarrassed. So anyway, so this goes way through American history. Oh, I opened to this page. A lot of people ask if in this book R is for Rosa Parks, because she is a woman who's incredible. And a lot of people have heard of her and know that story. So when people ask if R is for Rosa Parks, I say no, not because she's not amazing, but because most people know the story. And then I will ask, how many people have heard of Ella Baker? And usually I get fewer hands. And so then I say, that's why she's in this book. Ella Baker was a major part of the civil rights movement. And in fact, she was a mentor to Rosa Parks and to Dr. Martin Luther King. She was kind of one of the teachers who helped inspire them and show them how to organize and how to do the work that they did. But not as many people know her name. She was not someone who wanted to be in the spotlight. She was like behind the scenes. Sometimes I think of it like, you know, not everybody wants to be the lead in the play, right? Not everybody wants to be the star who has the spotlight on them singing the big solo, right? To put on a play, you have to have all the people backstage running tech, running the lights, doing the sound, doing the curtain. And that is how activism and change really happens, right? Some people are in the spotlight. Martin Luther King giving his speeches, everybody knows him. He's like the head, but he had thousands of people working with him, and so did Rosa Parks. So she's kind of, I think of her as like part of the stage crew for the civil rights movement. And if anybody's been in theater, you know it cannot happen with the people who are in the stage crew.
One of the students said in the chat she was working in the shadows.
Absolutely. And she was like, that's what she wanted. That's how organizing happens. So those are some of the stories I tell in this book. The other books in the series, after that book, I did this one called Rad Women Worldwide, which you can tell from the title that this is about women from all over the world. And I got the idea for this book, actually, when I was doing a lot of events for this. When I would get questions, a lot of the people in the audiences would ask if I would do one about women from other countries. In particular, a lot of young people whose families come from other countries were really curious to know stories about people from their countries and cultures. So that is what gave me the idea for this book, which has stories of women from all over the world, 40 different countries. Some of you may recognize Frida Kahlo, the painter from Mexico. Some of you may recognize Malala Yousafzai from Pakistan, the activist for girls' rights and education. And if you're super into soccer, or if you're from South America or Brazil, you might recognize Marta, who is one of the best soccer players in the world. One thing I like to say about the story of Marta that's in this book is I do a ton of research for these books, as you can imagine, right? Because everything's nonfiction, so I have to learn like so much about their lives. And I think sometimes when we hear the word research, especially when it has to do with history, you automatically think that's going to be incredibly boring. And maybe you don't, maybe you love research, but the feedback I often hear from students is like, ugh, research. So one thing I like to share is that research can look like lots of different things. Like, so for me, I definitely do a ton of reading. But to research her, the best thing I did for research was that I watched so many YouTube videos of her playing soccer. I watched old World Cups. I watched World Cup games on YouTube, and she's really famous for a couple of these goals that she scored in World Cup matches that are like some of the best goals you've ever seen. So I would just sit there and watch her score these goals over and over. And I did that because that helped the story come to life to me. So that was part of my research to understand her. Similarly, when I was researching Frida Kahlo, I didn't just read stories about her and read biographies. I looked at her art. I spent a lot of time looking at her paintings so that I could really get a sense of who she was and what she was creating. And I see someone saying history is anything but boring. Thank you. I agree. Sometimes, and again, you might not, I'm glad you love it. I hear this a lot from people, even adults, who say like, oh, I don't like history. And I'm like, that's like saying that you don't like food. Like, maybe you just don't like how history was taught to you. Like, just maybe you don't like what dish was served at the restaurant or what was on the menu, but you don't just like not like history because everything that's ever happened ever is history.
I used to think that I didn't like art history because I didn't love the way that it was taught in survey classes in college, because it was very chronological and memorization heavy. You just had to memorize 5 things about an artwork and didn't really get to learn about why it was significant or culturally relevant to the people who cared about it. And so I used to think I didn't like art history. And then I saw how teachers taught it in like AP art history in high schools. And I'm like, oh, it can be really exciting where you learn about something and then you get to practice it. And there's so many different ways. I like that. Let's see. Somebody says in the chat they prefer ancient history, mythology, secret histories. Ooh.
So I'm glad you brought that up. I also love ancient history. I love mythology. I love Greek mythology very much. I have a 8-year-old son. We're reading the Percy Jackson Olympian books right now, which are so fun to read. We listen to a lot of Greek mythology podcasts, but I'm glad you mentioned ancient history. I definitely do touch on some ancient histories. Oh, Egyptian mythology. Check this out. In this book, so I go into ancient history in the worldwide book. So I have a story. Talk about ancient history. So the first story in the book is the story of Enheduanna. So she lived 4,300 years ago, and she's considered to be the world's oldest known author. So she lived in what is basically, basically where she lived was like what is like Iraq now. But the fragments of her poetry that have been found, they predate Sappho, the Greek poet, they predate Confucius, and they predate the Epic of Gilgamesh. So if you've studied ancient history, the Epic of Gilgamesh is considered one of the most ancient texts, but the fragments of her poetry, and she was like a high priestess and a poet, and they've found actual fragments of her stuff that is like considered the oldest in the world that has a name attributed to it because she signed her name to it. And that those fragments were found about 100 years ago. So she's ancient Mesopotamia, but they didn't find any of her words until 100 years ago. And then I was also going to show you, you'd think that I would know where everything is in my books, but I still have to flip through. This is a story of Hatshepsut. So if you know Egyptian history, you may have know this story, that she is considered to be, well, we call her the first female king of Egypt, because she was the queen, but she wanted to rule, right? She basically should have been ruling, but because she was a woman, the highest level she could get to was queen. So she decided to just call herself the king. And she had all of the, she had these paintings that were done of her and all of the kind of, the sculptures and statues. She had them put all these traditional markers that a king would wear. She had them just like put, it's almost like she said, like, just put me in the king outfit so everybody just considers me the king. And so she ruled and had all of like these huge temples and pyramids. And so that's, I love that story because she was like, well, if you're not going to let me be queen, I'm just going to go ahead and say I'm the king. So that is Hatshepsut. 2 other books to show you. I wrote one called Rad Girls Can. This is about young women and teens who did really cool things before they were 20. And I have more ancient history in here. One of my favorite ones. So I write about Joan of Arc, right? Who's like pretty famous young girl from history. Then I also write about Kutalun, the Mongolian wrestling princess. She was actually Genghis Khan's great-great-granddaughter. And she was known as this really powerful warrior. And the legend is that her parents wanted her to get married, as parents back then often did. And she was this really powerful fighter. And she said she would only marry a man if he could beat her at wrestling. But if he beat her, she would marry him. But if she beat him, she would get all his horses. And so all these men lined up to try to wrestle her, and she beat everybody, and she ended up with like the most horses in the land. She had like 10,000 horses. And then she finally decided that she would get married, and she like picked the guy, and got married. But she's legendary in kind of ancient Mongolian history. So it has ancient stories, but it also has stories about people who are literally still girls right now. And then finally, oh, I see someone loves soccer. Great. I also love soccer. And then I did this book, which is called Rad American History A to Z. So this one is just in the US, and it is not just about women, as my son says. He's like, Mom, there's men in your book. He was really excited. So you might recognize, like, there's Dr. Martin Luther King on the cover. There's Colin Kaepernick, the former quarterback of the 49ers, taking a knee on the cover. So this book is about movements and moments in American history where people came together to make change for peace, for justice, for racial equity. So it's not just about individuals, but about people who worked together. This is a longer book. You can see there's more pages and more words. So that's me giving you the kind of overview of all of this. And I do want to make sure that I have time if anybody has any questions, or I can kind of share some more of the stories. Any more questions, or any questions in general? And you can go ahead and just unmute and ask the question. Ms. Seward, did you have a question?
Oh, let's see. I just saw something pop in the chat. Okay. You guys are talking about like pop culture things that you relate to it. Yep. Seen some people who have some weird World War II and Greek stuff in their backyard. Yeah. So a lot of people will collect, historical memorabilia and things like that. So one question I had as I was reading these, especially like this one astonished me because she takes entire lives of a person and distills it down to one page. And that was really my question is in the middle school, we started the semester learning about paraphrasing and taking, written word or something that we see on a video and being able to put it in our own words. And I was thinking, boy, you do a lot of that because, you weren't necessarily there to see all that history. So you have to, like we do research to understand it, just like, when we're researching an artist or a gallery. And then we have to put it in our own words. How do you do that? What are some tricks that you do so that it doesn't just sound like you're repeating other people's words?
Yeah, and so that's really important for a number of reasons. As a student, or as a writer too, one of the most important reasons is plagiarism, right? And plagiarism is copying someone else's work, right? So if you are doing your research and you're using something like Wikipedia, you can't just copy and paste a sentence from a website and put it into your your assignment. I mean, you actually can do that. It makes it very easy, but that's not allowed. It's not okay. As a student, you could get in huge trouble. As an author, I could get in huge trouble. And so the key is, how do you take a lot of information and then make it your own? One of the things that I do that I recommend to people, and sometimes it surprises folks, is that I recommend talking out loud. And people don't expect that because I'm a writer and I'm writing everything down, but I actually do a lot of speaking out loud. So, and trying to just tell the story in my own voice. So, and I recommend this a lot to people who have a hard time with writing. Like if you have an essay for class or there's something and you're really stuck on how to actually write it, if you have voice memos on your phone or any kind of app that can record you, open it up, hit record and just start talking and start explaining the story or the thing that you're trying to write about. So that's one thing that I would do. So I will do a lot of research about someone I'll read, and then I'll just kind of record myself, say, okay, well, here's a story of Ella Baker. So she was da 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 da, and I just kind of start talking. And it may sound really silly, but that's the way that I make sure that something is actually in my own voice. And again, it can get you past I don't like to call it writer's block, but that's a phrase a lot of people use. So if you're stuck and you're like, I don't know what to write, stop trying to write and just record yourself talking. And that's something that I have found can really work for me, and it can really work for students. And that way you are translating. So again, even if you have a sentence, and you're like, that's the perfect way to describe this thing, but I need to put it in my own words, read the sentence and then try to re-explain it in your own words. And then you write that down.
I really like that. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Also, I'm not talking about people collecting Greek mythology thingies. They literally just find them in their backyard. Like buildings and bases.
Oh, like when they're doing work in their backyard, they dig them up, like excavate and find old relics buried in their backyards.
Yeah, but sometimes you can also just find buildings out in the open, but just all covered in leaves. That's basically what I mean.
Cool.
I see Ms. Walsh, your hand is up. Do you have a question?
There we go. I was on unmute, but my microphone was off. So welcome and thank you for being here. This is a fantastic experience for us. So my question is there a story in there that you just feel like we should know, like one of your favorite characters that you're like, you don't know this person, but you need to?
Yes. I mean,
there is, but I don't know who it is. So
I mean, it's all of them, of course. But yeah, and actually I'll read you guys a story. And I'll share this person's story. So I mentioned kind of a lot of people ask if Rosa Parks is in the book, right? And so a lot of people also, they look at this cover and they see this woman with the airplane. And most people think that it's Amelia Earhart, which is a really good guess. That's kind of the only woman pilot that most people have heard of. And so this is not Amelia Earhart. This is actually a woman named Bessie Coleman. And so in this book, Q is for Queen Bessie. I'll give you a clue. She's not a literal queen, but there's a reason that they call her the queen. So this is one of my favorite stories because I didn't know anything about her before I started researching this book. And then I learned about her and I thought this was a really cool story to add. So she was born in late 1800s. So Bessie Coleman was 11 years old and living in Texas when the Wright brothers completed the first successful airplane flight in 1903. So 1903 is when the Wright brothers actually get a plane that they built themselves to take off and fly through the air, the beginning of flight, right? So Bessie read stories about these flying machines and she dreamed of soaring through the air herself. So her family was very poor. And even though her mom did not know how to read, she encouraged Bessie to pursue an education. The one-room schoolhouse for African-American children was 4 miles from their home. And on days when Bessie did not have to pick cotton in the field, she would walk all the way there and back. Despite her hardships, Bessie got good grades and she was able to graduate. As a teenager, Bessie continued her hard work. She polished other people's nails, she washed their laundry, and she served their food. She also listened to the tales that her brothers told her about the female pilots in France who flew planes in World War I. That was that. Bessie decided that she was going to be a pilot. She tried to enroll in pilot school, but every one of them turned her down. No one would accept a Black woman. So do you think that stopped Bessie from pursuing her dream? No way. So remember, she had heard about these women in France who flew planes. So she decided she was going to go to France. She started taking French lessons and learned enough French to be able to speak. And she raised enough money to travel all the way to Paris by herself. When she got there, she was accepted into a pilot school. She was the only Black woman there. And even after she witnessed a fellow student's terrible plane crash, she kept going. It took her 7 months to learn how to fly a plane, which I've always thought doesn't seem like a lot. That's like very impressive to me. I feel like it would take me more than 7 months to learn how to fly a plane. And in 1921, she got her international pilot's license. And that was actually 2 years before Amelia Earhart got her pilot's license. So Bessie continued to train as a pilot. And I think what's fascinating about her is she wasn't just like a regular pilot. Like she didn't just get in the plane and fly it from one place to another. She was a stunt pilot. And back then in the old days, that's what people did for fun, is they'd go out and they would watch people do these stunts in their planes. She did crazy tricks. She did barrel rolls where you fly your plane and you actually spin it like out of control in a spiral. She did dives where you fly straight up and then go straight down. And she did loop-the-loops like a roller coaster. This was called barnstorming. This was the name for that kind of thing. And she was considered the best and bravest barnstormer out there. So people started calling her Queen Bessie because she was just the queen of this kind of daring flight. One detail about her that I didn't fit in the story, because as Miss Seward said, I have to distill a lot down. I can't get everything in. But her most dangerous trick that she did was called wing walking. So this is an old timey plane. It's called a biplane because there's two wings, right? A top wing and a bottom wing. When she was flying the plane in the air and people are on the ground watching, she's in the air flying, she would climb out of the pilot seat and stand on the wing, and she'd hold on to the top wing, and then she would walk all the way out to the end of the wing, all the way out there, and she would wave at everybody below while the plane is still flying. And then she would slowly walk and climb back in and keep flying her plane. And that was called wing walking, and that was like the most daring daring trick out there. So that's the story of Queen Bessie Coleman. And I love that story. It's unexpected. People don't know her as much. And I'll tell you, actually, if you ever fly an airplane, if you ever fly to Chicago, to O'Hare International Airport, there is a whole road leading up to it that's called Bessie Coleman Boulevard. It's named after her because she did live in Chicago for a while after she left Texas. And here in Oakland, where I live, they also named the road leading to the airport after her. So there are people starting to hear a little bit more about her. But that's a story that I love.
Very cool. I think, yeah, we were all kind of shocked. Like I said, I'm afraid of heights. So that literally like makes my phobia hurt when I hear someone walking on a wing of a plane. Like that's some braveness for sure.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I have to go now to my next appointment. But I have loved getting to share these books with you and getting to talk to folks. Are there any last questions?
Secret histories.
Someone says secret histories. You know, there's a lot of histories in these books that are kind of secret histories or lesser known or stuff that got dug up later or stuff that people didn't want to talk about. So that's stuff that fascinates me as well. So I'm glad to know that a lot of you are interested in histories, whether it's legends or mythologies or secret histories or other things. It's really fun.
Like the Loch Ness Monster?
Oh, Loch Ness Monster is fascinating.
Yeah, right. And you can take, when I was in college, I took a women in US history class, and it's amazing, guys, to learn about all of these humans that have come before us and haven't gotten a lot of recognition because most history books were written by old white guys about old white guys. And so having, more of us learn about a variety of people and for humans to decide what was important to humanity, I think is just awesome that you are doing that work and leading that charge for a new generation. It's so cool.
Well, thank you, everybody. I hope you have a lovely day, and I really appreciate you inviting me.
All right, everybody, let's clap for Kate. Thank you so much.
I hope you create a lot of fun stuff today.
It was wonderful to have you. Thanks so much.